Welcome back to Judgment and Decision Making. I'm Dr. Padilla. Now we're going to talk about us versus them and how that influences our decisions. There's many arbitrary ways that we group ourselves. Some people might see white and tan dress here, others might see blue and black, and there are different camps of the internet that get in long, heated debates about which group is more correct. You might fancy yourself a dog person versus a cat person. Or maybe you think of yourself as a Democrat or Republican. There's a variety of other equally arbitrary ways to classify ourselves. Some research looks at giving people different identifiers for different groups. So one group of people in an experiment will get blue shirts, another group will get red shirts. And people know that their shirt, the shirt that they received was arbitrary, but the two groups will start to homogenize, where the blue shirt individuals will become more cohesive compared to the red shirt individuals. And there was some work done with students as well, and they found that individuals in one group of shirts believed that their shirt group was smarter and better than the other group. And this has been replicated in a variety of ways, that if you arbitrarily assign people to groups, people will begin to believe that their group is better than another group. Similarly, fans at a soccer match are more likely to aid an injured spectator if he is wearing the home team insignia, and that is an empirical research finding. It is vastly consequential when people are divided into us and them, in-group and out-group, the people, i.e. our kind, and the others. And this is one example of how you do it visually that I talked about in a few lectures ago. Anytime you're interested in otherizing people, one of the first ways that you would do such a thing is to make them look unhuman or other than you in some way. And that distinction really dramatizes this us versus them. And of course, it can have catastrophic effects that have been illustrated throughout all of human history. So we have some questions here. Is this mindset universal? How malleable is us and them categorization? And is there hope for change? How can we go about fixing or sort of not falling into this us versus them categorization? First, let's talk about the strengths of us versus them. It is a very fast processing system. Within 55 milliseconds, our amygdala is activated for faces of individuals that are a different race than ourselves. The amygdala is the area of the brain associated with fear and aggression. So that is a very fast process that doesn't happen for faces of our own race. Further, we fail to activate the fusiform face area as much for same faces as with other faces. So individuals that have the same race as us, we are activating our fusiform facial area, meaning that we have a more fine-grained ability to identify their features and recognize them compared to individuals of a different race. This is one of the contributors to why it is generally tricky to distinguish individuals of a different race compared to how easy it is to distinguish individuals of your own race. Similarly, we group by gender or social status at the same speed. It's really this fast automatic process that we see someone and we group them into a gender or a particular social status. Now this has to do with oxytocin, which prompts trust, generosity, and cooperation towards us, but crappier behavior towards them. Remember, oxytocin is this hormone that's associated with pair bonding, with good relationships, with love generally. Oxytocin is responsible for more preemptive aggression and economic play towards someone that is not within your group. Further, more advocacy or self-sacrificing for them, but not us, for the greater good. Us and them can be based on very minimal traits. For example, mimicry activates dopamine, which gives this sort of euphoric feeling. And there's some work that suggests that if you're in an interview and you mimic the gestures of the interviewer, that interviewer will be more likely to categorize you as a person within their in-group and then have positive feelings towards them. So anytime you're going into an interview, try to match someone's gestures and expression as much as possible. Now, the strength of us versus them is shown by The speed and minimal sensory stimuli required for the brain to process group differences, again, happens pretty automatically, and you don't need that much information to begin that process. It is unconscious and automatic. We are often unaware of these processes happening. That's why I recommended very early on in the course that if you're interested, you could take the implicit biases test, which tells you if you have some of these underlying biases. It's present in other primates and very young humans. I didn't discuss this as it does a great job in the book, but these types of biases that are starting to appear happen from the age of infancy all the way up through your entire life. There's a tendency to group according to arbitrary differences and then to imbue those markers with power. So one example of this is from this image I just Googled. I want you to try to guess what term did I use in Google to find this image. And I'll give you 5 seconds to do it. Okay? I actually Googled the term redneck. So if we look in this image, I'm sure many of you picked up on some arbitrary signifiers of group membership. Maybe the flag bandana, maybe the big beard, maybe the deer antler in the picture. I want to point out that these specific items are really arbitrary. They're easy for us to identify with a particular stereotype because they are now imbued with power. They are imbued with meaning and association because we've given those items meaning. Let's do one more. What term do you think I Googled to find this image? I Googled the term liberal elite. Again, you probably saw some signifiers. Maybe about 80% of you got the term. And I just want to point out that it's all quite similar. There's things like an Uber app open here, or a fine wine that they're drinking, salads, that their dog is sitting at the table with them. There's an avocado here. You know, all of these different signifiers of what is termed the liberal elite. And we give all of those items power. There's no associated power inherent with those particular items. So this us versus theming involves an inflation of the merits of us concerning our core values. We are more correct, wise, moral, worthy when it comes to knowing what the gods want, running countries, raising kids, and fighting wars. We are the best and we know the best. Similarly, usness involves inflating the merits of our arbitrary markers. That's what I was pointing out in those last two pictures, these arbitrary markers associated with different groups. Rationalizing why our food is tastier, our music is more moving, or our language is more logical or poetic. As we've seen with using, there's standardized ways that happens. There's also patterns for how we view them and others. We see others as threatening, angry, and untrustworthy. In economic games, people implicitly treat members of other races as less trustworthy. Whites judge African American faces as angrier than white faces, and racially ambiguous faces with angry expressions as more likely to be characterized as the other race, which I think has really strong implications for how we do jury selection, how juries make decisions about cases for different individuals. And white subjects become more likely to support juvenile criminals being tried as adults when primed to think about black versus white offenders. Of course, all of these very problematic for society. We also think of others as disgusting. One study finds that pictures of drug addicts or homeless typically activate the insular cortex, not the amygdala. The insular cortex is associated with this feeling of disgust. And this isn't just this sort of casual, like, oh, that's gross. This is a visceral response, a strong feeling of disgust, not just this, hypothetical concept of disgust that we get when we see pictures of homeless people or those with drug addictions. And I want to point out, because I've mentioned this in the past, that oftentimes you see people trying to otherize individuals by using the language of disgust. So these two posts are someone who called this people that weren't a part of their group disgusting or sickening. And you'll hear people talk about, oh, that group smells bad, or they're nasty, those types of things. Those are one of the strongest ways that you can try to otherize people and dehumanize them. This us versus theming can extend to other objects or organisms. One study found that washing a sweater worn by JFK would decrease its value at an auction, whereas sterilizing a sweater worn by Bernie Madoff would increase its value, which of course is ridiculous. We know that's ridiculous. But think for yourself, if you knew that a sweater for auction was worn by your favorite star, it would be of more value to you. Why is that the case? There's no real logical reason it's the case, other than there's this value that we associate with the people that we like, and it's also extended to objects that they touch or interact with. Finally, summary here is that the strengths of us versus them is shown by the speed by which this happens, the unconscious and automatic nature of these processes, its presence in other primates and very young humans, and finally the tendency to group according to arbitrary differences and then imbue markers with that power.